Okay, so Holly and I will chair the session this afternoon. And the first thing when we start the session is before the lunch, we don't want the panel, we don't want to keep everyone from the lunch. So we cut off the discussion session, usually it's the most exciting one. So that's why right now we're going to invite Anne back to help facilitate some discussion. As you can see from the panel, we have speakers from diverse background discussing different kind of very key, important issues related to big data. So how we can actually really having an impact by working in the big data area. So maybe. Yeah. So then we're going to, because we have one speaker is sick, that's who's not coming. That's why we're utilizing this time this way.
Yes. So this was the most tantalizing of opportunities. You were all starving to death and in stun mode, having heard 4 or 5 talks before lunch. But I want now you to really have the opportunity to ask your questions. But more importantly, I think we're going to allow the peer level questioning to go on between the participants. So who wants to go first?
I think I probably want to mention this. So as I quickly summarized this morning, one of the issue when we are actually working on the technical level, there's one issue that's beyond the technical level, actually is also directly related to social informatics, big data. That's actually the policy and the people side. So I want to actually hear my peers as well as the audience. From your personal experience, have you have any suggestions, tips to help our higher level decision makers to actually implement the policy that can speed up all this the impact while we're working on the technical level?
I mean, this affects everybody. You're trying to get your information out and your new methods out. What are some of the ways that have been successful in the variety of sectors that you're in? Hands? Yes.
Nobody discuss about the negative impacts of these electronic sensor devices on human body. All the data collection is there, vapors, but there is no statistic analysis. Nobody speaking. Can you answer some of
the inferences that can be made once you're wearing this type of data?
Or you also say in
Or
yeah, there are the sensors.
Yeah, there's.
Measure your walking speed, everything.
Okay, that's you're right. We were talking about the streaming sensor data and the need for modeling. So what's been done so far?
Can you give an example? Can you
Yes.
cite a case?
One case would be this new data on heart rate variability, that you make inferences, you know from accelerometer data plus heart rate, you know when they're exercising and when to interpret the data, when to ignore it, when to use the accelerometer more than heart rate variability, but inferring measures of stress, stress recovery. We've looked at a large data set in a group in Finland. Finland does most of the sensor work and has collected most of the heart rate variability thus far. And just the use of alcohol prior to bed destroys stress recovery overnight. Another interesting kind of indicator is the cognitive computer games that we've developed. We have embedded measures of executive function, divided attention, memory. It's not the game score, but the modeling that you get from the interactions with the computer give you a measure of executive function that is on the level of correlation with test reliability of the best neuropsych tests. Now you take that cognitive measure, you then look at the walking speed decline, which is indirect, it's not all of cognition. You take that with typing speed. You're measuring their login and password, you have another measure of motor speed. You're looking at word processing or emails, you're getting another measure, cognitive measure, by looking at linguistic complexity.
This could all go to Luminosity, or this could all go to Rosetta.
Yeah. It could, although what we're getting from Luminosity are game scores. We're not getting the embedded measures that are more accurate and, yeah, It could be useful, but it hasn't been analyzed in that way yet. But when we, some of the other measures that are so important are trying to infer a patient's motivation and barriers. We can measure with action plans and looking to see, are they really taking their medication? What is happening with their weight? We can measure adherence to their health goals. We have not looked at sleep quality data yet to see the interaction with mood, with cognitive performance. All of this needs to tie together and have models that fuse data from a variety of sources to give the best possible estimate of patient state.
May, you have a question?
So,
Sorry.
Another part was the negative impacts of human body.
yeah. Right, so I think that's what I think you were talking about, adverse effect, when you actually try to measure everything about the person. And for example, if you are wearing a sensor, just like we're carrying the, this kind of device, there were some study not going on in US, I'm not aware of that, but something going on in Asia, in China actually. They're starting that the men carrying the iPad or iPhone on the back actually impact the reproductivity on their, so that's actually, that kind of adverse effect has been mentioned already. However, right now, people are still pushing the front in terms of technology reaching people. They're trying to minimize the negative perception that can impact this kind of technology being deployed. So on the other hand, it's very, very valid issue. Right now, within US, one of the major challenges I personally encountered over the year, I mentioned during the lunch when we had a small discussion here, a lot of these kind of issue, targeting on prevention, targeting for the health and well-being, are not right now become top priority in terms of all the funding agencies. That's a pity. That's a big pity. The one, including when we deploying a new technology, researching the adverse effect, the only place right now in US becoming such gatekeeper, in fact, is FDA, but it's not enough. In fact, we need more investment on that. And so using Emory as an example, we have a Emory behind it, everyone knows Atlanta, Coca-Cola. We have a huge Woodruff Foundation. That's the backbone for Emory. So that's why Emory put the initial money, $10 million to get this started. Believe or not, we go after federal funding. Until today, zero success. However, remember I mentioned today, we did all this pilot study. We exhausted all this money, right? And because right now it's very expensive to do metabolome. You care about the prevention. One of the major challenges right now is hypertension, diabetes, develop that. We want to track that. That's a molecular, metabolomic, the profile, science insight is there. But we cannot give to the person to use it because we don't have funding.
Does this happen anywhere? Is there another country where this is going on that's a better model?
So I must say, from my personal research, because I have been working in the EU, European Union, in terms of their strategic planning, as well as Asia, and mainly China. And of course, the US, NSF&H, Canada, I also work. I must say that at this moment, I still think Europe is the leader. China, Asia is the second follow-up. The Korean has a huge program. They invest right now, working with the Samsung to deploy the Fitbit for health area. At this moment, the US is the last. North America now is the last in terms of making such an investment. That's why I was mentioning early on that why we have to influence the decision makers and the policy makers so that they can actually put more into this investment. Another related topic on this is interesting. While we're talking about, remember today I mentioned about so many choices you have to make, 72,000 you have to decide what to do. Interesting enough, I came back from industry myself. I work in multimedia industry, MPEG 4, MPEG 2, whatever we're using, all this right now. We pushed for MPEG 4, MPEG 2, that's standardization. But if you come back to the health area, they started way earlier. They started in 1960s, 70s, start pushing HL7, all those things, until today. In terms of standardization, in terms of policy for medical and health, moving in the, we call it in the turtle speed.
Yeah, so
So you've taken this to the grassroots level. What effect has this had at the policy or the leadership level with this case study? But go ahead if you were going to make an intervention.
yeah, I think when we look at medical data, one of the key issues that will dissuade people is as soon as this becomes attached to a particular prognosis. So we saw this, with people having to have blood tests for HIV, immediately they became uninsured a little while. So I think there's a real issue here for policy and insurance to understand. I'm also really concerned about, I'll talk about the socialization in a second, but I'm really concerned that big data at the moment is the preserve of the rich, and it's just enabling the rich to get richer. So how do we socialize this data so that it becomes valuable to the common man or the common woman? And I just don't think we're approaching that through that lens at the moment. In terms of policy and setting policy, you actually need to have politicians, dare I say it, who have some skill set beyond being lawyers and politicians. And in the US, the UK and Australia now, we have a professional class of politicians, and they don't want to learn. So we talk about education, but the critical people to educate is these politicians.
So what do you do?
And then I think is the issue of this idea of the common data, the common IP, the common big data, if you like. How do we recreate and take back ownership of that? The whole idea of the Commonwealth was that it was a common weal, it was a common good. The big data out there should be on that basis. So I think we actually as technocrats and geeks, as Anne occasionally called us, I think we really got a responsibility to start speaking out and doing it in a collective and programmatic way. Not a Snowden type way, but there's some real issues here. Technologically, we can do all of this, but that isn't the problem. Decision making is only one part of the problem. It's the decision takers, and it's different from the decision makers.
And what they need to know, and what we need to have the questions to ask them, so they can have the answers. It's a circle. It's the requirement is accountability and responsibility, and stop waiting for people to bring YouTube to your local monitor and tell you everything you need to know, because it's just not going to work.
So I just want to respond to that, because we've seen policy get implemented, theoretically protecting everybody, and then in reality, two uninformed people in a doctor's office visit trying to decide whether a person should release their medical data or not. Two completely uninformed, and we don't have the ability to educate the patients, the physicians, or the politicians in a way that is sufficiently reliable and have them make good decisions. There's a big role for computer scientists to devise techniques, like, for example, on the research talk, the people in genetics have been able to scramble the rest of the genetic data depending on the research question. If people are very specific and figure out what data to release, give a precise probability of identification versus de-identification. We need better tools to be able to assess the values of an individual and then give them the best possible data privacy model we can. I found, I'm measuring 50 different things about a person, some very sensitive when we're looking at older adults, their sleeping habits, when they get in and out of bed, how many people are in the house at any one time. We use this information, it's critical. we try to figure out how best to share it. We've found that older adults are willing to share this type of data by and large, but they want to be careful. They want a particular adult child to see it, not another. And we can't ask them 50 questions. Do you want this data, this data? They don't understand the implications, but through proxy questions and research in this area, we can make the assessment reliable, convenient, well, doable. Right now, the policies that are in place are not actionable.
They're not, that's the point.
Yeah. So what should we do? I asked a very good question. I also ask what should we do. I feel like in large extent, let's talk about baby step. Geeks like us can do. So I want to suggest a few things. For example, we just talk about next year's meeting in Taipei. Can we actually invite the policymakers to our meeting? Can we actually form such panel, all trying to share with them? So that's actually a baby step, right? We can do that. And as I mentioned that, when I was asked to give a talk in the CEOs, honestly, I do not expect much response because I'm a technical person. I mentioned about all these challenges. But to my own surprise, they came back to say, because one part of it, I was talking about education, but I was only talking about educated physician, educating patients. And I educate and training the new generation of data scientists and engineers. They came back to say, you forgot us. We are the decision maker. You need to educate us, and also you need to educate us, the payers. In US system, insurance company pay. So that's why, can we invite those people to our meeting? Can we go ahead,
But we should have a
educate
closed
them?
meeting, they won't say this openly.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So that's one baby step. Second baby step, I also want to share. We have a lot of academic-based in societies. How many of the society really have an office in Washington, D.C., talking to the policymakers? So actually, biomedical engineers recognize this issue about 10 years ago. We realize that right now, when we're talking about FDA, you can develop devices. FDA can hold you up for 10 years. You cannot get to the market. They also realize that when they change the president, they decide to cut down the Congress investment on NIH to support biomedical research. So what they recognize this issue, they actually start having an office in Washington, D.C. Now, they invite the policymaker to our society, and meanwhile, we actually do the other around. We go to the Congress to tell them why you cannot reduce the biomedical research. I think that these are the baby steps we can do as geeks.
Here. Well, exactly what, no matter what area I've been in, as a convener, facilitator, head knocker, this is what works. In the cyber area, for example, our International Cybersecurity Dialogue brings CEOs into a 2-hour roundtable with some CEOs of technical companies who are aware of the policy requirements. And they are able to ask those questions they're too embarrassed to ask in an open conference or in an open panel. And they start engaging in making their own network, and we send them away. We don't claim anything. The process is what we claim is critical. The same at the practitioner level. And so then we ask them to send in their EVP or their COO, and they go back and talk to their counterparts. So they're creating their own trust-based network, but they trust the fact that we are bringing them together. And that's really the easiest and the least expensive way that you can start these conversations. And you invite people who are sitting forward in their chairs, even after lunch, because they're aware the dysfunctionality is growing more quickly than anything, and the stability is going to immediately be affected. Immediately going to be affected if people don't get some of this.
And talking of people sitting forward in the seats, one of the comments you made to me yesterday was what a fascinating, interesting group of people were having this conversation.
Yes.
And yet you haven't heard them or of them, and they're not speaking to the Washington group.
No.
So I think that's a powerful point. You know, between us, we might be pretty wacky, but we've got some ideas and alternatives that I suspect if we get the right invitations, folk will listen to. I don't know if you want to elaborate.
Oh, no, you can elaborate.
No, well, okay.
I don't want to be asked to be asked. I don't want to ask to be asked. I think it's, the point is, you can all do this. We're happy to help in any way we can. The important thing is we have to reach out, and we have to stop taking no responsibility for asking those questions that in a disastrous situation of health or environment or job loss, you're going to have to ask. You just have to, we have to start self-educating. There's just no way around it. So thank you for giving me that soapbox.
May I actually also pose another question?
Please pose this.
Because I think that's another important topic related to privacy and security. Who owns the data?
Yes.
I actually find out this is very interesting, even in today's presentation, where some people are willing to pay a huge money to those data, the data we volunteer donated. Who owns the data? Who gives them the right to be the one, make a profit out of it, while we, as a patient, we're not accessing to it. So I want to hear my peers, as well as the audience, to share some light on this particular issue.
Yeah, that's a very good idea, good point, because that's why ASC was started, and we're talking about data for patients, we're talking about data for research or publications, right? Who owns the data?
Yep.
I publish my paper, you publish your paper, and so on. Who owns data? So we don't want the people. I publish my paper, other people use my paper to make the perfect.
Yes.
$35 per paper for this. So that's the reason we want to really free open access. That's very good for the community. Same thing back to your patient data. Now, who owns the data is a very good important issue.
But by doing what you're doing, you have created a community once again that's interested in sharing. I mean, in the 90s, we had this, period of light, love, and flowers on the internet, and everybody was giving everything to everyone else, and all of a sudden it all shut down when people started stealing it. And what you're trying to do by integrating these 4 massive subjects at one time, with time constraints, is to encourage people to realize that if they don't collectively establish that shared community again, they're going to forever be apart and not have help.
Especially next year, ASC also promote the idea of data publication. So people not only submit the paper, they can submit the data to share with the communities. It still be free access everybody in a community in the world.
Right.
And it's very important question. Come back to your question: who owns the data, right? So let's hear maybe more people's opinion about this.
Is anybody awake out there?
Is it Switzerland that has started to commoditize data and have people be able to sell their
Yes.
own data?
Yeah, of course it's Switzerland. You've been percolating all morning.
I'm a bit amused to see that the legal community is not getting excited about a class action against this data ownership. People own the data.
Maybe they're tired. They're doing so much nefarious
In
stuff.
other cases, insurance claims and things like that, or bank defaults, the legal community get excited and go for a class action. In a case like this, which is very critical for patients, so the data is
Yes.
personal. Why they're not really excited in this country or anywhere else? I really couldn't understand that. So any thoughts?
I have a thought, but as a non-technical person who admires the technical community tremendously for their discipline and their expertise and their brilliance. But right now in this country, we walk around with a Fitbit on our wrist. We are on Facebook. We are on LinkedIn. We talk on innumerable SMS, Skype. We give our information away, and then we're excised because the NSA has slipped up and collected too much without asking our permission or breaking the law. Where does that make sense? We're giving it away without even thinking about it because it's just so easy and so self-gratifying to be all close and connected all the time. Where does that make sense?
I think there's also a difference between ownership and responsibility, right? You may own your data, but in the case of medical, for instance, the hospital collects it, curates it, makes sure it's all right, maintains it over time, and they can aggregate it. So there's a little bit of a difference or a flavor of ownership as opposed to curation and
Well, maybe we should be held responsible for our own information. Maybe that would help.
well, I mean, there's all the personal health records, right, where your hospitals now can share and you can take ownership of personal health records.
Right.
Yes.
We do own that data. Individuals own their own medical data in the US anyway. But it's always the reality. You go and ask for it. You ask for your medical record because you're going to move from one state to another. That doesn't mean they make it available in a convenient form. It might be a tome of, 100 pages. That's useless. So it's the spirit of the law is there, but and again, the actuality, it's not actionable, it's not being truly implemented in a way. It's been such a struggle to have medical records that are with data harmonization that can be used anywhere else.
That's true, I mean, but meaningful use, for instance, requires that it be made available in electronic.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
the problem is that each hospital has their own medical record form, so that
Standardization.
And the hospitals are saying that meaningful use and those requirements have stymied all research development. They have had to divert all of their funds toward being able to implement. They're furious. They're being penalized, it seems, but, and the ones that have been more electronic to begin with are having an easier time, but those that haven't are struggling. And again, the policy, the hospitals are feeling that the policymakers don't understand them and aren't at all sympathetic.
Or care.
Or care, yeah.
I think
There's a question over here.
It's more of a comment. We're just coming off the human microbiome studies, right? So now I'm from University of British Columbia, and now we're putting together a cohort of kidney stone formers and non-formers, and we're evaluating their microbiome, and that's coming online. The regulatory situation in Canada is a lot different in that, like, we have an upper house, but it doesn't really do anything. It hasn't done anything since the middle of the 70s. So it's very ornamental, right? So passing legislation comparatively is a dream. But it's still early days, but we have no idea what we're going to do with these samples and who owns it, and these are all issues that. So I'm interesting, but from this perspective, like, this is coming down the pipe, and there's some talk about how the microbiome can be used to, just as a general human health kind of thing, sort of like the Fitbit thing, similar sort of aims there, but it would be like, it could have an effect on what kind of prescriptions you could prescribe somebody.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the microbiome?
Microbiome is the bacteria that live in your gut.
Oh,
It's the
those are
main
the
one.
good bacteria.
It's the
Okay.
gut bacteria, but it could come from your ear, and it could come from vaginal is a very informative one. But that's everybody's really excited about it, so it's coming up as a promising area of data analysis.
Stay in touch.
Yeah, but we don't. But right now we're still on the hospital kind of controls it, and he does its thing in its own best way.
How's the time?
What's the mental barrier for hospital share this with the research community?
Well, what's the big barrier is that somebody who didn't understand the data structure at the very beginning, what a lot of people who go into these areas don't have what I call basic data literacy. And so it becomes like this when the data was collected, there was no sort of, somebody who wasn't there with, first of all, study design isn't done very well. So people who are doing like, you know, the classical statistics of experiments, that's, even though it's a $30 million project, we didn't have a statistician on board, right? So
What, that's the first
Probably
thing,
not, should not have been
data,
said.
data design, data.
I mean, Terry Speed, a statistician down at Stanford, is like livid about it. He's like, all these people in Washington are like all of this big data community, and statisticians are being left in the dust, right? It's like, it's not important. I've got the entire data set. I've got a million things, but you know, there are issues of bias and how that sample is made that it's like more data isn't going to get rid of that problem, and you get bit in the ass about it. Sorry,
It's a technical term.
it's a technical term, but essentially, like Google's running into this problem with their, they were thinking that they,
Google Health.
yeah, Google Health they had running, that is no longer becoming effective. But yeah, going back to the issue is that people who had someone who understands the structure of the data to build the experiment as it was going on into like, you know, essentially just even have the most primitive databases are doing better. Because those things, I'm not saying you need to be the expert person, but you need to have an awareness of what data is like.
Aren't we over our time? Yeah. This is unheard of.
My suggestion is, can you maybe, this is the question you asked, like, who owns the data, right? Can you summarize
Yes,
what's yours now?
I think we own the data. And then when I posed the question, I was trying to hear what everyone else is thinking. But also, meanwhile, I want to re-mention again what I mentioned this morning. Right now, there's a big push to go for open data, even in biomedical area. The reason is right now, hospital think they own our data. Insurance company think they own our data. Medicare, they think they own our data. As a result of it, they turn around, you sell researcher back like us, $1 million to gain access to a small port of data. It's our data. So then people like us who really want to work with the expert, the physicians on this data, we don't have access to data. We have to first raise $1 million to access to data. So we're looking around to us, thinking we have to promote in our communities to promote open data, like a patient like me, right? We care about who we are. So we own the data, so we should do things on that. On the other hand, as pointed out early in the conversation, there are people trying to use that data against us. That's why everyone is worried and concerned that. In that regard, I do believe it comes back to related to policy issue. We have to develop policy to protect us, but so that we're willing to share the data.
So that could be a forward action.